"Put those balloons down or I'm calling the police." "Ma'am, these are for my daughter's birthday." "I don't care, you stole my party theme." "Yeah." That's Karen, screaming at me in the middle of my driveway while holding my kid's unicorn centerpiece hostage like it's a hostage negotiation. Smash that like button if you've ever met someone who thinks glitter and helium belong exclusively to them. Subscribe for more real-life chaos with sprinkles on top, because this one ends with a firefighting plane dropping thousands of gallons of water on the most expensive garden party this town has ever seen. Buckle up because karma's about to rain down hard. It was one of those mornings where everything seemed to line up perfectly. The sun was soft and golden, the air smelled faintly of vanilla frosting from the bakery box on the counter, and my daughter Emma was already dancing around the living room in her sparkly unicorn pajamas, singing about how this was going to be the best birthday ever. I had spent weeks planning it, every detail crafted to make her smile. She had wanted a backyard filled with color, balloons stretching up to the trees, ribbons swaying in the breeze, and a cotton candy machine puffing out pink sugar clouds like something from a dream. I rented tables, bought streamers, and even splurged on those fancy biodegradable confetti poppers because she had seen them in a YouTube video and begged to try them. It wasn't extravagant, but it was full of heart. I wanted her to remember this one as the first birthday since her mom had gone back to school full-time, the one where she realized her dad could actually pull off something Pinterest-worthy. By noon, the backyard looked like a fairy tale. The balloon arch stood tall near the fence, a cascade of soft pink, lavender, and white that framed the handmade sign reading, "Emma's Magical Day." The cake sat safely inside, waiting to be revealed, masterpiece of pastel frosting and edible glitter that made my kitchen smell like cotton candy and sugar cookies. The neighborhood kids had already started riding by on their bikes, slowing down to admire the decorations. For once, everything felt peaceful. That was before I heard the sharp, unmistakable sound of high heels clicking across my driveway. Karen arrived like a storm front, sunglasses perched on her head, clipboard in hand, and a glare sharp enough to cut glass. I had seen her around before, always busy policing lawns and scolding delivery drivers for parking too close to mailboxes. She was the unofficial monarch of the cul-de-sac, the self-proclaimed enforcer of all things tasteful and proper. I had half expected her to say something about the extra cars parked near my curb, but instead, she stopped dead in front of the balloon arch and folded her arms. Her expression was one of pure disbelief, as if I had committed an unthinkable crime against suburban aesthetics. "Interesting choice of colors," she said slowly, scanning the decorations like a food critic inspecting a questionable dish. I smiled, hoping to diffuse whatever tension was brewing, and told her my daughter loved unicorns and pastel themes. That was all it took. Her face twisted as if I'd just confessed to stealing her diary. She started talking about how she had been planning her granddaughter's birthday party for months, how her design consultant had chosen this exact color palette, and how my setup was clearly a copy of hers. I tried explaining that it was a coincidence, that unicorns and pink balloons were hardly patented, but she wasn't hearing any of it. Her voice grew louder, cutting through the calm afternoon air. Within minutes, she was accusing me of aesthetic theft and disrupting the visual harmony of the neighborhood. I stood there, holding a roll of tape, wondering if I'd fallen into some kind of reality show prank. Then, in one swift motion, she yanked the happy birthday banner from my fence and marched away with it fluttering behind her like a victory flag. My daughter stood on the porch clutching a balloon, her eyes wide with confusion. I reassured her that everything was fine, but inside, I felt the first pang of dread that this woman was about to turn our happy day into a war zone. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to salvage what I could, replacing the banner, straightening the decorations, pretending not to notice her peering through her blinds as I worked. Every so often I'd hear her muttering to someone on the phone, using words like infringement and complaint. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just wanted my little girl to have her party. When the sun began to dip below the rooftops, the lights twinkled across the yard, and for a fleeting moment, everything looked perfect again. Emma ran to me and hugged my leg, saying it was the prettiest party she'd ever seen. I smiled and told her it was all hers, silently praying the woman across the street would stay on her side of the fence. What I didn't know then was that the war had only just begun. The morning after Emma's birthday should have been calm and quiet, the kind of morning where leftover laughter still hangs in the air, and the smell of frosting lingers in the kitchen. Instead, the house felt hollow. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Usually, I would wake to the faint rattle of balloons bumping against the fence or the soft creak of decorations shifting in the breeze. That day, there was nothing. When I stepped outside, coffee in hand, my heart sank. The entire yard was stripped bare. The balloon arch was gone. The fairy lights were gone. The banner, the tables, even the rented cotton candy machine that had taken me 2 hours to assemble had vanished without a trace. All that remained were small circles in the grass where the table legs had been, and a few bits of ribbon fluttering near the hedge like evidence from a crime scene. For a long moment, I just stood there, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My first thought was that maybe the rental company had come early to pick up their equipment, but when I checked my messages, there was nothing scheduled until the following afternoon. My second thought, the one that hit like a brick to the chest, was that someone had stolen everything. The idea seemed absurd. Who would steal birthday decorations? Who would walk into a yard filled with balloons and glitter and decide to take it all? I pulled up the security camera footage from my phone, still half convinced it was some kind of mistake. The footage showed exactly what I feared. At 2 a.m, a figure appeared on the screen wearing a silk robe that shimmered under the porch light. Behind her was a man I assumed to be her husband, pushing a red garden wagon. Together, they moved methodically, gathering everything that wasn't nailed down. They untied the balloons, unplugged the lights, rolled up the tablecloths, and even carried off the cake stand. Watching it unfold felt surreal, like some twisted parody of neighborly cooperation. The woman's face turned toward the camera once, and there was no mistaking it. Karen. I stood there in my living room watching her load the wagon with the same decorations I had hung with my daughter the day before. It was almost impressive how calm and deliberate she looked, as if she genuinely believed she was entitled to take it all. When the video ended, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief so sharp it made my hands shake. I walked straight to her house, determined to confront her. Her lawn was a mirror image of mine from the day before. The pink and lavender balloons swayed in the same pattern, the cotton candy machine sat humming on the patio, and there, in bold gold letters, hung a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Madison." Karen appeared at the top of her porch steps, holding a tray of cupcakes and smiling as if nothing were out of the ordinary. When I demanded to know why she had taken my decorations, she simply tilted her head and told me that I should be thanking her. She said she was protecting the neighborhood from what she called my unauthorized party setup. She claimed my design had violated aesthetic guidelines and that she had repurposed the materials to prevent further embarrassment to the community. Her tone was sweet, but every word carried the smugness of someone who believed they were the hero in their own story. I told her she had no right to take my property. She told me I had no right to defy her authority as HOA event coordinator. When I asked her who made her the coordinator, she smiled and said, "Everyone knows I run things around here." For a moment, I thought she was joking, that maybe she would realize how insane it all sounded, but she didn't laugh. Instead, she turned and motioned toward her yard as guests began arriving, children dressed in the same pastel colors my daughter had picked for her theme. My unicorn centerpiece sat proudly in the middle of her table. I could hear her telling one of the parents that she had stayed up all night decorating because she loved to give her granddaughter the best. Every word made my stomach twist tighter. When I went home, Emma was sitting by the window, holding one of the few balloons I had managed to hide indoors. She asked if we could have another party next week, maybe with new decorations. I told her we would, but inside, I was already planning something else. Karen had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. She had turned a child's birthday into her personal victory parade, and she had done it with the confidence of someone who thought she could never be stopped. As I closed the curtains that night, the laughter from her yard drifted through the window, and I realized that the next celebration on this street wouldn't be for her granddaughter, it would be for justice. The next morning began with the low rumble of voices outside my window, the kind of muffled arguing that makes you instinctively brace for trouble. I peeked through the blinds and saw Karen standing at the end of my driveway with 2 men in blue uniforms. At first, I thought maybe she had hired movers again, but when one of them leaned on the hood of a police cruiser and started taking notes, my heart dropped. I stepped outside, coffee still in hand, trying to act casual, though every muscle in my body was tense. Karen spotted me immediately and pointed like she was identifying a fugitive. The officers turned, and the look on their faces told me they'd been listening to her version of events for at least 15 minutes too long. The lead officer, a tall man named Delgado according to his badge, introduced himself politely and explained that they were responding to a report of stolen property. I almost laughed. Karen, standing proudly beside him, held a clipboard as if she were presenting evidence in court. She began explaining, in the most self-assured tone I'd ever heard, that I had taken decorations that legally belonged to her granddaughter's party. She claimed to have HOA documentation authorizing her to confiscate my materials to prevent what she called community confusion. Her words were perfectly rehearsed, her voice full of authority, and for a split second, I could almost see how a stranger might believe her. I told the officers that every single item she had stolen was mine, backed by receipts from the rental company and a credit card statement showing the purchase of the decorations. I showed them the security footage on my phone, clear as day, with Karen and her husband wheeling away my balloon arch in the middle of the night. The second officer, a younger man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, covered his mouth to hide what might have been a laugh. Delgado took my phone, watched a few seconds of the footage, and then slowly turned toward Karen. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this video shows you removing property from your neighbor's yard." Karen crossed her arms and smiled, a tight, brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. She told him the footage was taken out of context, that I was twisting her act of community service into something malicious. She began quoting rules from an HOA handbook that apparently only she possessed, citing imaginary bylaws about neighborhood aesthetics, noise pollution, and property presentation standards. Delgado let her finish her speech before handing my phone back to me with an expression that hovered somewhere between disbelief and fatigue. "Ma'am," he said again, this time slower, "this isn't an HOA issue. This is theft." Karen's demeanor changed instantly. The confidence drained from her face, replaced by a flush of outrage. She began shouting about her reputation, about how she had worked tirelessly for this community, and how she wouldn't be treated like a criminal. Her voice climbed in pitch until it cracked, but Delgado didn't flinch. He told her to calm down and suggested that returning my property would be the easiest way to resolve the situation. She stood there trembling, glaring at me like I'd personally rewritten the laws of the universe to make her look foolish. Her husband finally shuffled forward, mumbling that they'd just wanted to borrow the decorations and that it had all been a misunderstanding. Karen snapped at him to be quiet, but it was too late. The officers exchanged a look, then politely instructed the couple to return everything immediately. Karen stormed off toward her backyard, muttering that this was far from over, that she'd be filing formal complaints with the HOA board. I watched her stomp through her gate, every step radiating fury, while her husband trailed behind, dragging the wagon like a defeated soldier. By noon, my decorations were back where they belonged, though most were damaged. The balloon arch sagged, the tablecloths were stained with frosting, and the cotton candy machine was missing a piece. Emma stood beside me as I looked over the wreckage, and she asked why the lady next door hated us. I told her some people just didn't like being told they were wrong, even when the truth was staring them in the face. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table filling out the police report Delgado had encouraged me to file, I caught sight of Karen through the window. She was pacing her driveway, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. The porch light cast long shadows across her face, and for the first time, I saw something other than arrogance. There was desperation there, the kind that only appears when someone realizes their control is slipping. I thought about letting it go, about ending the whole thing, and focusing on making Emma's next birthday special. But then I remembered the way Karen had smiled when she took that banner, how sure she'd been that I couldn't stop her. The thought of her walking away unscathed after humiliating us burned deep in my chest. As I turned off the kitchen light and locked the door, I made a quiet promise to myself that this wouldn't be the last chapter. The next move would be mine, and for the first time in days, that thought made me smile. It started with a phone call that wasn't meant for me. I was sitting on the porch one evening, the air warm and thick with the smell of cut grass, when I heard Karen's voice drifting from across the street. She was pacing her yard, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in that clipped, bossy tone that made every conversation sound like a board meeting. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her voice carried easily in the quiet of the cul-de-sac. She was talking about permits, insurance, and something about an exclusive event that will outshine that ridiculous unicorn fiasco. I leaned back in my chair, half amused, half uneasy. It seemed she wasn't satisfied with stealing my daughter's birthday decorations. She wanted to prove something bigger, something public. 2 days later, the neighborhood was buzzing again. Flyers appeared in mailboxes advertising the Garden Gala of the Year, hosted by none other than Karen and her husband. The flyer promised live music, catered food, and an elegant lakeside experience for those with refined taste. The event was set for Saturday evening, the same time I had planned to take Emma out for ice cream. I didn't want to give Karen the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten under my skin, but it was hard not to feel irritated watching her transform her backyard into a stage. White tents went up, strings of lights were draped across her patio, and delivery trucks came and went for hours. It looked less like a neighborhood gathering and more like a wedding reception. The morning of the party, I noticed something unusual in the sky. Low-flying aircraft were circling the nearby forest as part of a weekend fire prevention drill. I remembered my friend Greg mentioning it a few days earlier when we caught up over the phone. He worked as a pilot for the regional firefighting unit and had joked about needing a break from the training schedule. "We're testing the new water bomber," he had said, laughing. "If you see us flying low, don't panic." At the time, I hadn't thought much of it, but as I stood in my driveway, watching Karen's crew haul in yet another delivery of floral arrangements, an idea began to form in my mind. It wasn't malicious at first, just an idle thought born from frustration. But the more I replayed her smug smile, the way she had dismissed the police and humiliated me in front of my neighbors, the harder it became to ignore. By mid-afternoon, her backyard looked like a luxury magazine spread. There were fresh-cut roses floating in fountains, a small stage set up for a local string quartet, and even a rented archway, covered in silk drapery. Guests arrived dressed in linen and pastel colors, holding champagne flutes and air-kissing each other as if this were some exclusive gala instead of a suburban get-together. From my window, I could see Karen making her grand entrance, greeting everyone with the poise of a queen surveying her court. Every gesture, every laugh, every exaggerated thank you felt like it was designed for my benefit. When Greg called to check in later that evening, I couldn't resist asking him where his team was flying that night. He told me they were running low-altitude drop tests over our side of town, near the lake shore. I asked, purely out of curiosity, how specific their coordinates had to be for a practice run. He chuckled and said that, as long as they avoided populated areas, it wasn't an issue. I remember pausing, staring out the window at the sea of white tents glowing under the setting sun, and asking a question that came out sounding much more casual than it was. What would happen if someone filed a coordinate report that was just a little off? The silence that followed was long enough for me to regret asking. Then Greg laughed again, assuming I was joking, and said, "Let's just say a lot of thirsty lawns would get watered." That was all I needed to hear. I told him there had been some confusion about property boundaries in our area, and that maybe his team should double-check the grid markers near my street. He promised to look into it and ended the call with a friendly warning not to blame him if someone's barbecue got ruined. At exactly 7 that evening, just as Karen raised a glass to toast her guests, the low hum of engines filled the air. Heads tilted upward, hands-shaded eyes, and a collective murmur rippled through the crowd as a massive yellow firefighting plane appeared above the trees. For a moment, it was majestic, sunlight gleaming off its wings. Then came the roar of the drop. Thousands of gallons of cold lake water cascaded downward, drenching the tents, the guests, the string quartet, and every inch of Karen's meticulously decorated paradise. The air filled with screams, splashes, and the sound of fabric ripping under the weight of water. Flowers flattened, candles hissed out, and tables collapsed like paper. From my porch, I could only watch in awe. It was chaotic and oddly beautiful, the water sparkling in the twilight as it rained down on her garden. Karen stood frozen in the center of it all, soaked from head to toe, her perfect party reduced to a soggy wreck. The guests scattered toward their cars, laughing and shouting. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear Greg's plane banking away, probably none the wiser about what he had just done. I didn't cheer, and I didn't gloat. I just sat there in the fading light, sipping my coffee as the last drops fell, and thought about how sometimes the universe doesn't need your help delivering justice. It just needs the right coordinates. By morning, the neighborhood was buzzing like a beehive that had been shaken. The drenched tents, the wilted flowers, and the chaos of Karen's once grand party had become the only topic of conversation within a mile. Every porch had a spectator the next day, every neighbor peering through blinds, whispering theories about what had happened. The story spread faster than gossip at a family reunion. Some said it was sabotage, others claimed it was divine intervention. The truth was that no one could quite believe a firefighting plane had dropped its entire load of lake water directly onto Karen's lawn at the exact moment she began her toast. When I stepped outside, the morning smelled faintly of damp grass and disappointment. Karen's once immaculate yard looked like a swamp. Mud squelched underfoot where her white carpet had been rolled out, and the grand floral arch had collapsed into what could only be described as a soggy skeleton of stems and silk petals. Her pastel tablecloths hung over her fence to dry, fluttering in the wind like surrender flags. I saw her standing in the middle of the mess, hair frizzed, makeup streaked, clutching a clipboard as if sheer willpower could undo what nature or karma had done. The best part was that no one was laughing at her to her face. They didn't need to. The neighborhood Facebook group had already exploded with photos and videos. Someone had filmed the entire thing from their balcony, catching the exact moment the water hit. In the footage, you could see Karen holding up her champagne glass, her voice echoing through the microphone as she thanked everyone for celebrating her vision of elegance. Then came the roar, the collective gasp, and the sight of her guests diving for cover as gallons of water turned her celebration into an aquatic disaster. The video was edited, captioned, and uploaded before sunrise. By breakfast, it had gone viral. I didn't even realize how far it had spread until a coworker texted me a link with the message, "Isn't this your neighborhood?" The title read, "Entitled Woman's Luxury Party Gets Water Bombed by Karma." The comments were merciless. People were dissecting every frame, quoting her dramatic reaction, speculating about what she had done to deserve it. No one knew the full story, but everyone agreed on one thing: it was poetic justice. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace settle into my chest. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about release. Every bit of tension that had built up from her endless harassment and smug control seemed to wash away, along with the confetti and champagne. Emma came outside barefoot, laughing at the puddles glistening in the morning sun, and asked if we could throw rocks into them. I told her to go ahead. She splashed through the mess, her laughter echoing across the street like a small anthem of victory. Karen, on the other hand, was unraveling. She spent the entire day marching from house to house, demanding to know who had called the fire department, who had leaked the video, who had dared to laugh at her misfortune. When she reached my driveway, she stopped and glared at me for a long time, her eyes red and puffy. She accused me of orchestrating the entire thing, of somehow manipulating the flight path, of turning the neighborhood against her. I didn't deny anything. I simply told her maybe it was time she let other people have their turn to celebrate. She stood there trembling, speechless for once, before storming back to her waterlogged kingdom. Over the next few days, the HOA held an emergency meeting to discuss the incident. I didn't attend, but word spread that several members had voted to remove Karen from her position as event coordinator. Her iron grip on the community had finally loosened. No one wanted to side with her anymore. Parents she used to lecture now avoided her, and the neighbors she used to intimidate found their voices again. It was as if her downfall had broken some invisible spell she had cast over everyone. A week later, we held another birthday celebration for Emma, smaller and simpler. Just family and a few close neighbors who brought over cupcakes and laughter. The yard glowed under soft string lights, and for once there was no tension, no shouting, no clipboard hovering nearby. As the sun went down, the air was calm and sweet, and I could finally breathe without glancing over my shoulder. Emma blew out her candles and whispered a wish, then leaned against me and said, "I hope that lady finds some happiness someday." I smiled and told her that maybe, just maybe, she already had the best kind of happiness, the kind that comes from knowing you didn't have to fight dirty to win. In the days that followed, the remnants of Karen's party slowly disappeared. The tents were hauled away, the flowers composted, the mud dried into cracked earth, but the story lingered. Every time it rained, someone would joke about keeping umbrellas ready, just in case Karen decided to throw another gala. She stopped talking to most of the neighbors, and for months afterward, her porch light stayed dark. The sound of her voice, once a constant in the background of every day, became a distant memory, and me, I learned that sometimes justice doesn't come through arguments, or court forms, or shouting matches. Sometimes it comes quietly, disguised as coincidence, carried on the wings of a plane that just happened to be in the right place at the right time. The kind of justice that doesn't just balance the scales, it cleans them. And there you have it, proof that sometimes poetic justice arrives in liquid form. If you've ever had a neighbor who thought the world revolved around their lawn, hit that subscribe button for more true tales of suburban madness. Drop a comment with your wildest Karen encounter. I read them all, and trust me, they're therapy. Remember, never steal someone else's joy or their decorations. Because when you rain on someone's parade, sometimes the universe rains right back.